This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, where we discuss all of the news in the world of sports. My name is Ben.
And I'm Anthony.
We are back here on a Friday, leading you into the weekend. A busy schedule show here today. We're not going to waste any time. We're leading off right into the NFL Divisional round of the playoffs. We're going to give our predictions for these 4 playoff games. We'll go in order of which they appear. The first game tomorrow, 1:35 Pacific time, so 4:30 on the East Coast. The Seattle Seahawks going into the Georgia Dome to take on the Atlanta Falcons. Anthony, who you like?
Seattle. I like Seattle just because I don't necessarily trust Atlanta. I'm not just talking about how the team's playing this year. I don't trust Atlanta as a city in the playoffs. Like, they kind of have a history of getting somewhere and then not being the best. Just listen to Bomani Jones. Bomani Jones kind of had like this laundry list of all these things that happened with the Falcons. But outside of all of that, so while Seattle and Arizona basically are contrasting with what they're doing right now, because Atlanta has the really good offense, and Seattle basically since Earl Thomas went down, they haven't been the same team, especially in the secondary. I think they were like 30th against the pass or something like that since he went down. So even though that part of it's not necessarily something that you would kind of, have confidence with, the thing with Seattle is now they kind of figured out a running game last week. So that kind of helps balance out the offense, because now with Russell Wilson being healthy and now you also have Jimmy Graham as the tight end, you have something to where, they can actually do something more or less, offensive-wise. And defensively, I think they can kind of scramble together enough defense for them to still actually be a good enough team. And I just kind of like the Seattle Seahawks against the Falcons.
Interesting. I'm gonna go Atlanta, but I would not be surprised if Seattle wins. Obviously, winning pedigree. Russell Wilson is a Super Bowl winning quarterback. I think I have more faith in this Atlanta offense, which kind of surprising because Matt Ryan is 1-4 in his career in the playoffs, so
right.
He hasn't really gotten it done. But I'm gonna pick Atlanta. I think the injury to Earl Thomas is huge, especially in the middle of the field. It kind of limits that safety over the top issue with Julio Jones. Atlanta's been so good all year. Matt Ryan, 4,944 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. I think he'll have success. 2 good running backs in Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. I do think the one X factor in the game, and you touched on it, is Thomas Rawls in this running game. Last week you and I were like, oh, the offensive line's terrible, they can't run the ball, and they run for over 150 yards.
Right.
So I think if Thomas Rawls in this running game can have success, I think if Rawls goes over 100 yards, I think the Seahawks are going to win this game.
Mm-hmm.
But is it going to happen or not? I'm not really sure. This offensive line having to go against Vic Beasley, who led the league in sacks. Going to be very interesting to see what happens there. So I'm going to go with Atlanta. I think it's going to be a close game. The spread's 5. I think Seattle probably covers that. I think just Matt Ryan maybe makes one play more than the Seattle defense does and wins the game. But we have a good little chess match here: offense versus defense, strength versus strength. So I'll go with Atlanta, but narrowly. I don't think they're going to really have an easy game at this. Seattle's still a tough team. Got to have a lot of faith in that leadership there. But I'll go with Atlanta. I think they're at home. I think they'll make a difference. The next game on Saturday, the Houston Texans go into Foxborough to take on the New England Patriots. I don't think we're in agreement here. I think we're obviously in agreement here that Houston's not going to win this game.
Right.
Yeah, so the question is, the spread is 15.5.
Yeah.
Do the Patriots cover that?
No. And the only reason I say no, they won't cover that is because you got a lot of things where you can have like a backdoor cover. Like, let's say they're up by like 17 points and then, at the end of it, they get a little, touchdown at the end of it, make it 10 points. Okay, cool. You still won by a lot because at 17 points, you kind of have the game well in hand and then just get that garbage touchdown at the end and make it 10. Like, I think they cover the game because also I think with Belichick, he's basically going to do enough to where they're clearly ahead, right? He's going to do enough to where once they're ahead by, like I said, call it 14, 17, 21 points, whatever it is in the fourth quarter, he's just like, all right, Jimmy, come here. Jimmy, get in the game. Or even Jacoby, who beat them last time, by the way.
Shut them out, 27-0 on the road on a Thursday night.
Right.
So literally everything going against them, and they still dominated them.
Right. So I think, he can, at a certain point, just bring him in, and if that's the case, maybe he brings in the backups, then all of a sudden you get a touchdown or so, and now the game gets a little bit closer, still way, ahead, but something to where, like, the 15.5 doesn't cover.
I'm in agreement with you. I'm actually going to give the points. 15.5 is a lot.
Yeah.
So you're practically giving up 16 points. That's a lot. But I can't trust Houston. Belichick's known really for 2 weeks that he was probably going to play Houston. Probably thought they'd win against Oakland, and the Steelers would handle business against the Dolphins. So Belichick's really known for 2 weeks that he's probably going to play Houston, a team they already shut out. Not going to say they're going to do it again, because they probably won't. But he knows how to beat them. He already did it. Brock Osweiler not really faced any adversity last week. He's going to go on the road in a cold weather game to face Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and that defense who is playing really well as of late. I just don't see any way they come away with this victory. The only way is that they can run the ball really well with Lamar Miller, control the clock, keep Brady and the rest of that offense on the sidelines, and just convert in the red zone. But I really don't see that happening. I don't see any way that the Texans come away with a win here.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. Like, Osweiler, the whole season, we haven't really seen him, like, throw down the field. Like, me as a fantasy football person having, DeAndre Hopkins, I know he doesn't throw to him. That's not how this goes. He throws to the tight end. So it's not like he's going to all of a sudden start throwing deep and the game's like 14-0, Texans. After the first quarter, like, I don't really see a way, like I said, outside of Lamar Miller, just like getting some, big old holes and just running for touchdowns. Like, I don't know how they actually score a lot of points.
I don't see it either, buddy. So now that takes us over to Sunday. The first game on schedule for Sunday is 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern Time. The Pittsburgh Steelers going into Arrowhead Stadium to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. The Steelers are actually a road favorite, just 1 point though, but they've been playing really, really well as of late. They won 30-12 last week against Miami. Le'Veon Bell really did everything for them last week. Ben Roethlisberger, a couple of touchdowns to Antonio Brown. But for me, the one question mark is that ankle injury.
Right.
He had the walking boot after the game on Sunday, but then after that, just that one day, he wasn't using it anymore. He's been practicing all week with no limitations, no limps. But reports are that he may be further aggravated a former fracture. We'll have to see how it affects him on Sunday. He's going to be facing a good pass rush, a D Ford, Tom Bahali, Justin Houston, a physical Chiefs secondary that gets a lot of turnovers. I'm going to go with Kansas City in this game. Pittsburgh are really riding a hot hand right now, but I think them going on the road. Andy Reid, in his career on bye weeks, is fantastic. He's only lost 3 games. Technically, this is kind of a bye week, although he didn't really know who he was going to be playing, but he had a pretty good idea. He's probably going to play Pittsburgh. I'm going to go with Kansas City. I think the offense won't make any mistakes. They have a couple of really big difference makers. The best tight end in the playoffs right now in Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, who every time he touches the ball is capable of taking it all the way. He's lightning in a bottle. I'm going to go with the Chiefs in a close game. I think they're going to do just enough to slow down Pittsburgh, get to Roethlisberger, really test that ankle, and make him make plays and not have Le'Veon Bell beat them, which is what happened to Miami last week. Yeah,
so, God, I want to pick Kansas City really badly in this game because, you've seen the stats with Andy Reid when he comes off of a bye, and, this isn't exactly the same thing as in the regular season, but he did have a bye, and you kind of had a decent idea that it was going to be the Steelers because the Dolphins were banged up at quarterback. So you kind of thought that was a solid enough possibility that could happen. But, with this game, Pittsburgh, like I said, it's kind of depending on Roethlisberger and how he actually is, right? If he's actually somebody who plays the game and doesn't have, like, the injury, I think that'll work out a lot better for him. When you look at Kansas City, they're, at least against the run, they're, 26 in the NFL. So they're not exactly, able, or the season they've been able to stop running backs. Le'Veon Bell is like top 3, depending on how you want to clarify Johnson and Ezekiel Elliott.
I'd say he's the best running back in football.
So you have that situation going, and you have the 3 Steelers potentially healthy, and Roethlisberger, Brown, and Bell. So I'm going to go with the Steelers, but I think that it's going to be more than that 1 point. Like the fact that they're favored, fantastic. I think they win by like a field goal or a touchdown at the end. I think it's like a really close game, and especially the fact that it's in Kansas City and Kansas City lost in the regular season. I think this is probably going to be the best game of the entire weekend. but I give it just because outside of Tyreek Hill, I don't know anybody else on the Chiefs that could actually beat the Steelers. Like Alex Smith, like kind of what we talked about Osweiler. Osweiler's like a poor man's Alex Smith, right? He doesn't do those kind of like long passes. Smith doesn't either, but he can. He just tends to like to, throw the short passes or whatever, and if Tyreek Hill can run for 30 yards after the catch, then fine. But outside of him, there's really nobody else on that team that's going to like get a big play to beat the Steelers. And if the Steelers can do it against the Dolphins, where they had, 2 big plays. I understand they weren't deep passes, but 2 big plays to Antonio Brown straight out the gate. Like, I don't know how Kansas City ends up catching up to them.
I'm really looking forward to this weekend and hoping we have some good games. I think we have, on paper, 3 games that could be really, really good.
Last week was bad.
Because last week was terrible.
It was really bad.
Every single game was a blowout last week. So I'm really hoping that we have some really, really solid games this week. And that leads us into the weekend cap, the final game in the divisional round, and probably the game that has the most headlines and storylines. The Green Bay Packers are going on the road to take on the Dallas Cowboys, the number 1 seed in the NFC, going down to AT&T Stadium. This is a rematch from a game in Week 6, which the Cowboys did win 30-16 in Lambeau Field. Really dominated Green Bay, but the Packers coming in red hot, winners of 7 in a row. Dallas coming off of that bye week really haven't played a lot of their starters in 3 weeks because in Week 17 against Philadelphia, Dak Prescott played 1 series. Ezekiel Elliott was dressed but did not play. And Aaron Rodgers is coming in red hot. Jordy Nelson is not going to be playing in this game most likely. He hasn't officially been ruled out, but all signs point to those ribs just not being healthy enough to play. So I think that makes a little bit of a difference. But you know what, Anthony? I am a Packers fan.
Yes, you are.
And I promise you, I really do promise you, that this is not me being biased.
Okay.
I'm serious.
All right.
I'm going with Green Bay in this game for a few reasons. Number 1, I give them the quarterback edge.
Yes.
And that's really important. It's the most important position in football. So I give them the quarterback edge. Obviously, Rodgers against a guy who's coming into his first ever playoff game and is a rookie. So I give the edge to Aaron Rodgers in that regard. They're hot. They're not rested like Dallas, so they haven't played in a few weeks. They could be a little rusty. Could that offensive line in Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. And 2, I think that Jerry Jones is just adding pressure to his team. We talked about it on Wednesday, saying regards that given his rookies' college careers, it makes them equivalent to veterans in the NFL, which is just simply not true. I think the Packers are going to sell out to stop the run. Ezekiel Elliott absolutely gashed them in Week 6, had over 150 yards rushing. So I think they sell out to stop the run and say, Dak Prescott, we are going to make you beat us. The question is, can he do it? I think he can. He has had probably the best rookie season that we've ever seen at the quarterback position. So I think he can do it, but I think Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay just makes one more play than Dallas. Aaron Rodgers absolutely killed this New York Giants secondary last week without Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson got injured early in the second quarter. Rodgers goes to throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Nelson had 18 yards receiving. So Randall Cobb and Devontae Adams had success. This Dallas defense is not nearly as good. I think the game is going to be a shootout. I think both teams score in the 30s. But I think the Packers just make one more play because I have more faith and trust in Aaron Rodgers than I do in a rookie making his first career playoff start.
So you talked about Aaron Rodgers, and yeah, clearly he's the better of the 2 quarterbacks, right? What else, especially since Jordy Nelson's hurt, what other position do the Cowboys or do the Packers have that are better than the Cowboys?
I think their receivers are better.
With Jordy Nelson hurt? That's what I'm saying with Jordy Nelson hurt.
I'll take Randall Cobb and Devontae Adams
over
and Ty Montgomery over Dez Bryant and Cole Beasley. Absolutely.
Okay. But outside of that, I don't think that there's many things that are better, that the Packers are better than. With all of that said, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to still say the Packers because I think Aaron Rodgers is a freak of nature right now, and I think he's throwing Hail Marys that are basically just like slant routes to him, which kind of...
You see that the Cowboys are actually preparing and have been practicing to defend the Aaron Rodgers-esque Hail Mary, where he kind of just...
You might as well.
He lobs it into the air. It's not like he's throwing bullets or darts. He kind of just throws it straight up.
Yeah. Well, you might as well because clearly he's very good at it. Like
he knows what he's doing, man.
Yeah, like, and it's not one of those things like it's a Hail Mary where, you know, it's just like 5 people around and one guy just kind of jumps higher and catches the ball. No, like the last Hail Mary he threw was just like straight caught it, like just a pass, like a normal giant pass. So, I don't know, like, I would absolutely, if I was the Cowboys, defend against that because, I mean, he's clearly really good at it. He's made, 3 or something like that recently? Like, he's that's something that you kind of have to worry about at the end of the game, because that kind of hurt the Giants at the end of the first half. It was like, okay, cool.
It was a huge momentum killer.
Yeah, it was,
because Green Bay got the ball right away. They did not score, but they go in up 8 at the break. It was 14-6.
Yeah.
And the Giants were absolutely destroying Green Bay, with the exception of those last 2 offensive possessions, the touchdown to Adams and the Hail Mary to Cobb. So I'm with you. It's an absolute game changer.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, like, okay, maybe you think the wide receiver is a little bit better for the Packers, but as far as the running game goes, I mean, you can rely on Ocho. You can think he's going to do well, and that's fine. But, Dallas is really good against the run. Like, they're number 1 against the run, and that could be because they played bad teams and the running backs they're playing aren't that good. But
and their offense holds the ball the entire game.
Right. So, with all of that, like, I can see a way to make this game close. But I think the one thing that, we talk about a lot before was, Jerry Jones saying that basically they have playoff experience because they were in bowl games. That's not exactly how that goes. And while I can see one of them being fine and one of them kind of still having, the type of games that you would expect them to have, that doesn't mean both of them will. And if one of them doesn't, then all of a sudden you have a situation where, the team doesn't look as in sync, because let's say Ezekiel Elliott still has a good game. Let's say he has like 120 yards rushing, because Green Bay's not that good against the run. So let's say he has a good game, and then Dak gets up there and, throws 1 interception and fumbles the ball once in the first half. So then all of a sudden he's rattled, the team's rattled, they're not as confident anymore. You got the fans cheering Romo for whatever reason, because they just want to, like, basically have him back in the game. Like, it's going to be kind of a mess at that point, right? Or even if it's the reverse way, it's something where, like, I can see it kind of snowballing a little bit for the Cowboys, because the Cowboys, as much history as they have, as many Super Bowls as they have, since 1995, they're basically a, snake-bitten team, like, and the fans are starting to kind of have that mentality of just like, oh no, bad things are going to happen, oh god, oh here it goes, kind of thing. And if it starts to go sideways, I can see the fans kind of like freaking out, and like I said, just then yelling for Romo for whatever reason.
I don't know if that's the case, but I think Green Bay's definitely going to sell out to stop the run. This team is built to run the ball. Physical offensive line, 3 first-round picks. Ezekiel Elliott led the league in rushing. I think the Green Bay Packers need to sell out to stop the run, put at least 7 or 8 guys in the box, make Dak Prescott beat them. They have to make Dak Prescott beat them. If they let Ezekiel Elliott run wild for 120, 150 yards, like you said, then I think the Cowboys are going to win this game, because they're going to hold the ball so long. Their defense is going to be healthy and rested, and Aaron Rodgers, as hot as he's been, we'll have to see what happens. I think it's a shootout in the making. I think, honestly, though, if Dallas does not get off to a good start, if they show signs of rust, where that first quarter they don't really get things clicking on all cylinders, I think it could be a bad game for them, because Aaron Rodgers is playing as well at the quarterback position of anyone we have ever seen right now. And I think he's primed to have another great Aaron Rodgers game, 300 yards, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns. I really do. So if Dallas does not get off to a good start, I think this game might get away from them, because this team is not really built to come from behind. They want to run the ball. They want to eat time off the clock. Dak Prescott's been great, but that's because a lot of the attention is going on Ezekiel Elliott, and he's having man-to-man, one-on-one coverage on the outside every time. If they're having to play from behind, I think it spells a recipe for disaster for Dallas. But we'll have to wait and see. And always on Monday, Pauline and I will be back to update you on everything and results in the NFL Divisional Round games. We'll take our first break of the show. After the break, we'll talk about the 2 new coaches out in L.A., one for the Chargers, one for the Rams, as well as the Cal Golden Bears being close to hiring a new head coach. Talk about that right after the break at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So the LA Rams are the youngest team in the NFL. So, of course, they're going to hire the youngest head coach in modern NFL history. 30-year-old Sean McVay is the new head coach for the Los Angeles Rams, formerly the offensive coordinator for the Washington Redskins. Good move, Anthony?
I mean, from everything I've heard about this guy, he is like one of those like kind of, fantastic genius people that, it makes sense if he's 30 years old that he gets to do this. I think the youngest before him was Lane Kiffin?
Kiffin.
I'm not saying
31.
That, yeah. And I'm not saying he's going to be on the thing of Lane Kiffin, because Lane Kiffin kind of ended spectacularly badly with the Raiders with the whole Al Davis press conference and talking about how terrible he was. And you had stuff with, him wanting to basically have Janikowski kick like a 70-yard field goal for whatever reason, or maybe it was like an 80-yard field goal. Like there was bad things there that you could blame on him being young. But with McVay, he's been with the Redskins since 2010. So, before that he was with, Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2008. So he's been around the league since he was basically 22 years old. And so he has some experience, even though, 30 years old. Like, he has experience with this whole thing. And, it's one of those things with, like you said, it's a young team, because I can't imagine him being 30 years old and going into, like, a veteran locker room, say, like the Patriots. Like, so for whatever reason, the Patriots were available, or, like, the Steelers or something like that. Like, I can't imagine him going in there and then all of a sudden just having people who are like 35 years old. Like, you imagine him being the Steelers head coach and walking to James Harrison's office and be like, James, I need you to do this. Looks at you like, who the hell are you?
Yeah, like this guy on the Rams, there's only one player older than him. He's 31 years old. I forget his name, but he's a cornerback. So it's a young team, but imagine him going into, like you said, New England. Like, Brady's older than him.
Right.
And he's taking decisions and play calls from a guy who's literally younger than him. Like, that just doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
But I guess it's an okay move. You're going to hire an offensive guy because you have to try and find someone to develop the guy you invested your whole entire franchise in Jared Goff. You don't have first picks for the next couple of years because you traded all your picks at Tennessee to get Goff. So you need someone to try and build this offense. This offense was absolutely terrible last year. But for me, the better move is him hiring Wade Phillips as the defensive coordinator. Wade Phillips, taking over for Denver the last few years, has had the best defense in the league. And you need a guy to try and build this defense and maintain this pretty good defense that you have out in L.A. with Aaron Donald, among others, while Sean McVay handles the offense. So you hire Wade Phillips. I think that's a fantastic move. I think that's probably the better move in this whole thing, and he's a defensive coordinator. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. Kirk Cousins did some okay things with Sean McVay as offensive coordinator, so maybe he can try and develop Jared Goff into that role. I don't think he's necessarily as good as Kirk Cousins will ever be, but it's going to be interesting to see. Personally, I'm surprised Kyle Shanahan hasn't been a coach yet. I know he's still coaching with Atlanta, the offensive coordinator there.
Right.
I think his time will be soon. He's been a great offensive mind, really built up a lot of young quarterbacks, kind of resurrected Matt Ryan this year in my eyes. So I guess it's an okay move. They need an offensive guy. The league is going young. The league is going offensive. And really with a lot of these coaches, and it'll transition into my next one, but a lot of these coaches are kind of first-time coaches. We've seen Sean McVay. The only really exception is Doug Marrone out in Jacksonville. And the other first-time coach will be the new coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Still seems so weird saying that. I'm not saying I guarantee I'm going to mess up and say San Diego a few times.
100%.
So the Los Angeles Chargers have agreed to a four-year deal. This actually was broke this morning with Anthony Lynn. Anthony Lynn was the offensive coordinator in Buffalo for the majority of the season. He was the interim coach for the last game. He is now the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. He did pretty good with Buffalo since he took over early in the season. It was after a few games after that Jets game that they fired their offensive coordinator, and they went over to Anthony Lynn. Did a lot of good things with the running game, sort of re-energized that team a little bit. LaShawn McCoy had a fantastic year under him. So now you bring him over to Los Angeles with the Chargers. You have Phillip Rivers. You have a lot of good weapons out there. You just got to try and get some of them healthy, like Keenan Allen. Melvin Gordon had a great second year after his first year. His rookie year was kind of a disappointment. So Anthony Lynn going out to Los Angeles now to be the Chargers head coach, I think it's a good move. First-time head coach, offensive guy. You're kind of built on offense anyway, and you have a little bit of more advantage with the defensive side in Los Angeles with the Chargers than I look at with Buffalo. So, I mean, Joey Bosa's really good rookie year after he didn't really do anything in training camp and preseason. So, you think about next year what he could do. I think he'll probably have a breakout year. So, I think it's a good move for Lynn and for the Chargers.
Yeah, because you look at Lynn. Lynn's style is kind of like that ground and pound, kind of around the same lines as Rex Ryan kind of thing. And you look at someone like a Phillip Rivers, right? Phillip Rivers kind of can do this in his sleep at this point. Like, he doesn't really need an offensive coordinator to tell him, oh, we'll do this. Like, he knows what to do. He'll be fine with that. Kind of not in the same Peyton Manning mold, because Peyton Manning was basically some like offensive savant. But like at this point, Phillip Rivers, with what he has, knows what he can work with. But the running game, like, you know, as great as Melvin Gordon is, he hasn't had 1,000 yards rushing, and he hasn't played 15 even games in a season. So I can see with Anthony Lynn kind of getting that kind of situation fully developed, making sure everything like that is good, getting the offensive game kind of all wrapped around and make sure that's great. And as far as the defensive goes, like you said, between Joey Bosa and the rest of that defense, they have a pretty good defense coming up. So if you can get that, like you said, one thing with McVay was he got Wade Phillips, who's like really, really great as far as the defensive coordinator goes. You do something like that, and now if you bring in someone who has a really good defensive mind, then you can kind of wrap this whole thing around, because the Chargers, as much as we want to make fun of like the Rams and how bad the Rams were when they moved to LA, the Chargers aren't that terrible. Like, they were really close in a lot of their games, and all it was basically, you know, they just didn't have enough necessarily to keep winning these games, because the team got people on ACL, on IR, because of any sort of injury you could imagine for the first like 5-6 weeks of the season. Like, I remember talking about this with Alex, like every single week it was like, oh, another IR person, like every single week. So they have like any kind of offensive, you know, production this year, and they're, you know, basically team doesn't get decimated by week 6 next year. I think they can be actually a pretty good team. And, you know, like I said, with Melvin Gordon, with Joey Bosa, with Phillip Rivers, with Antonio Gates still doing good, I think you have a pretty good situation there where maybe they don't make the playoffs, but I can see them being like something like a 9-7 and showing a little bit of progress going forward.
I agree. I think it's a good team. I think at the end of the season they maybe kind of quit on Mike McCoy. A lot of us knew he was going to be canned. So I think it's an okay situation. Phillip Rivers is a good, solid quarterback. I'd rather go in to be the Chargers head coach right now than I would be the Buffalo head coach right now or the Rams head coach right now. So it's not a bad situation. And staying in California, we're switching over to the college game. The California Golden Bears did fire their head coach on Sunday, Sonny Dykes, kind of because he was looking at becoming the new head coach at Baylor. So they're like, oh, you're kind of looking otherwise? Well, then we're going to look otherwise.
Right.
So they are now looking at finding a new head coach, and they might have one. They're in contract negotiations right now. They have offered the job to this man, but he has not officially been named coach yet. It is Justin Wilcox. He is the defensive coordinator for Wisconsin right now. Wisconsin, a great, great defense last year, one of the best in all of college football. He spent his last 11 seasons as a defensive coordinator. A couple of years ago with USC, with Washington, with Tennessee, Boise State. Washington and USC, two of the better defenses in the Pac-12 right now. So it looks like Cal is definitely making that transition to want to get away from the offensive side of the ball, which was really all they had under Sonny Dykes, and build this defense, which honestly, since Dykes has been there for the last few years, couldn't really stop a nosebleed. So they're trying to make their transition going defense as opposed to offense, which is kind of the flip-flop of what college football is right now, because all the flashy stuff is on offense, all these spreads and no-huddle offenses and zone reads and running quarterbacks. So Cal trying to maybe do a little different there. I would imagine if he's from Wisconsin, he'd probably try and implement a Wisconsin-style offense.
Right.
He'd have to hire someone, and they'd have to figure out what to do. But a physical ground-and-pound running game with big offensive linemen, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm not surprised that Cal got rid of Sonny Dykes. I think it's a good move in that regard. He wasn't really the future of Cal football, and they need to try and build what they were in the early 2000s, the mid-2000s with Jeff Tedford when they had Aaron Rodgers, Marshawn Lynch, Justin Forsett, Deshaun Jackson. They had some pretty good teams back in the day. So I think it's a good move. The defense was so poor. You got to try and find someone to build it. Yeah,
and you talked about how good Wisconsin was. I mean, they were fourth in the entire college football in points allowed and 13th as far as yards go. Like, their defense for the last few years has been phenomenal, and now you get him in there. And I mean, I guess it's kind of the mindset you think of, okay, cool. So you have, you know, teams like Washington and even Oregon if they can get back to it, and USC now if Sam Darnold can be good. You have all these offensive teams, and okay, maybe we're not going to be able to compete with them on that level, but okay, let's just basically do the one thing. Let's do the antithesis of that. Let's just basically be a really good defensive team. And who do you bring in? The guy that's been responsible for some of the best defensive games we've had recently. Like, if you look at actually how Wisconsin's done this year alone, like, fine, they lost 3 games, so they weren't exactly like what you can call a great team, 8th in the country, but they lost to Michigan and Ohio State, right? And they lost 14-7 there, and then 30-23 there. So they were really close games, and they had a brutal stretch. I remember we kept talking about of Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, Nebraska, back to back. And through all of that, the only games they lost was Michigan and Ohio State by a combined 14 points. So he's even proven as a defensive coordinator that he can actually scheme well enough to keep them in these games. Like, they had a really good shot of winning both of those games, obviously. And if you can have, it's going to take them a second to get kind of those defensive players into Cal. It's not going to be next year all of a sudden they come in and the defense is going to be as, great as Wisconsin was. It's going to take a few years. But at least he's shown the, mentality of, okay, cool, if this is what I want to do and if this is the people that I'm given, I can make a really good defensive team out of it. So that's at least encouraging for Cal going forward.
Wilcox, as I said, has not been named a head coach. They're still in negotiations. The job has been offered to him. He's never been a head coach anywhere in college football, so I would imagine he would accept that, a step up in role, probably a step up in pay. But California is tough. It is one of the best high school states to recruit from. A lot of good recruits from California, but you're battling USC, UCLA, Stanford. Washington's really close. That's been doing good things. Oregon's always there. So, it's tough, but I think it's doable. You have a good, solid foundation. You already have some connections with the West Coast because you were the coordinator at USC and Washington, so you have some ties there already. So I think it's a good move, and I hope that he takes the job, and we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. We'll take our last break of the show. After the break, we'll talk about the NBA going global. We had 2 games last night outside of the United States. Well, outside of Canada and United States, I'll say, because Canada plays all the time with the Raptors. So we had a game in Mexico City as well as a game across the pond over in London. Talk about if that is a good decision for the NBA or not after the break at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Last night, the Dallas Mavericks picked up their 12th win of the season over the Phoenix Suns, 113-108. The game was played in Mexico City. We've seen that for the last couple of years now, games in Mexico City, which is not too far, especially for Dallas and for Phoenix. You have Arizona and you have Texas, which are border states to Mexico. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Darren Williams led the way for the Mavericks. He had 23 points. They actually had 6 players in double figures, which was very, very good. And then for the Phoenix Suns, we had almost a takeover in the fourth quarter by Devin Booker. Devin Booker scored 28 points in the fourth quarter. He finished with 39 overall. But he had 28 points in the fourth quarter. The rest of the team had 4. So literally it was the Dallas Mavericks versus Devin Booker in that fourth quarter. And he almost got it done. He hit 6 of 7 from 3. He's been a very, very good player since coming out of Kentucky. Think about that team he was on. Willie Cauley-Stein, Karl Anthony Towns. He was kind of the guy that no one really talked about, that shooter out in the perimeter. And he's developed into probably the Suns' best player right now.
Yeah.
He's absolutely been fantastic. And then the other game was across the pond, as I mentioned. The Denver Nuggets, they might want to move to London after this game. They scored 140 points for a 140-112 victory over the Indiana Pacers. The Nuggets were led by Jokic. He had 22 points to go along with 10 rebounds. Wilson Chandler had 21 points. Danilo Gallinari had 18 points. They had a really, really balanced squad here. Put up a lot of points. But, Anthony, we're going to sort of debate here. The NBA having this game in England.
Right.
I think it's a good move. You have a lot of European players over in the NBA. You have really a global sport here in basketball. But playing NBA games in the regular season in England, to me, just really isn't a good move.
See, I don't mind it so much. Like, I don't like it in the NFL because the NFL, you have 8 games, right? At least 8 home games. And whenever
team's giving up one of their home games.
You're giving up 1 out of 8, right? It's one of those things. Like, if you're a road team, like, I guess fine, whatever, doesn't matter. But for the home team that it's supposed to be, like, if it's, let's say, the Cardinals and the Falcons, and it's a Cardinals home game. No, it's not. They're thousands of miles away. It's not a home game. I don't care how you paint the field and say it's, this team's home game. It's not. It's far away. And in the NFL, like, those really, really matter. Like, let's say you're the Seahawks going, your quote-unquote home game over into England. Like, Seattle's all the way on the West Coast, and if you do that, that's, 6,000 miles? That's a really, really long way. And Seattle, kind of the way, Atlanta, Kansas City, they have, or not Atlanta, like Kansas City, they have really good, home fields, right? And for something like Seattle, that's what they've been banking on, basically, so they're going to go 8-0 or 7-1 at home, and then you can figure out the road, wins enough to get them to 10, 11, 12 wins. So that part, I don't understand with the NFL. I get you want to, expand your brand or whatever, but that just seems kind of like a weird thing to do. With the NBA, there's 41, right? It's not the same thing. Like, the Cavaliers just lost 2 in a row, and no one's really freaking out about it because it's the Cavs. And it's like, yeah, they'll be fine. Wake me up in June when they're in the finals again against the Warriors. Like, you don't really tend to worry about it that much. And with the NBA, you're going, one of those games is to Mexico, which you said, Phoenix and Dallas, it's close enough kind of thing, so it's not going too far away, and it's only one of the home games out of 41. And the other one, even though you are going a pretty long way, we were talking about it, how much time the Denver actually had off in between these whole things. Like, it wasn't just like, okay, so today's Friday. So it's not like, on Tuesday they played, in Denver, and then on Thursday they had to fly all the way over to England. Like, no, there was a decent enough break in there to where the, people that were playing were basically drained coming back. Like, you gave them enough time to kind of not adjust to it, but, enough times to where you were there and you can kind of get somewhat used to it. And then you come back and you get back to kind of the NBA style. Now, they may be a little sluggish for the first 2 or 3 games after this, but again, 41 home games. So,
and the Pacers, who are 20-19, and the Nuggets, who are 15-23.
Right.
Not gonna say their seasons are over, but they're not really going to be competing for playoff positioning in my eyes. So.
Sure, and yeah, it's the thing where if you're baseball, if you're basketball, like, you have so many regular season games, you might as well try some things. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Sacramento Kings at some point go to India and play a game in India in the regular season because the owner
of Vivek Ranadive,
being
so Indian. So
right.
That would make sense.
So, I can totally see these things happening and going to different countries. Like, I could see them, like, England, obviously, India. I could see them going to China or something like that. I could see them going to all these different places. I guess with China, it'd be something like the Houston Rockets because you had Yao Ming forever. But, I could totally see them doing these things and just kind of throwing these things out there just to try and get a few more eyeballs, to get a few, more money, let's be real. And to kind of expand it like that part wouldn't surprise me at all. It doesn't bother me because of all the games that you actually play and how, honestly, little they matter.
For me, going to Mexico City is not that bad, especially when you put 2, I guess, Western teams in there.
Right.
So that's not too far of a travel, a couple-hour plane flight. For me, going into England in the regular season, I don't necessarily agree with that. Think about the 2 teams you have here. You have Denver, so you have Colorado, and you have Indiana Pacers, obviously Indiana. You'd think if you're going to have a game over in Europe, you'd have 2 East Coast teams in there. You have, like, Boston against the Knicks.
Right.
Not too far of a travel. You have Denver and Indiana. Denver's next game is on the 16th, so 4 nights after this game. The previous game before that was on the 7th, so
right.
5 days before. So within 9-game stretch, they're playing 1 game.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? You have more games upcoming later in the season in less nights. So you probably have more back-to-backs, 4 out of 5s, stuff like that going on because you decided to go over to Europe. In the preseason, I would have no issue with this at all because in the preseason, these games don't really count. You're trying to eliminate people from your roster. You have more days in between games in the preseason where you're just kind of getting your body healthy and rested. Like you mentioned, these teams might come over back to the United States and be a little sluggish, take some time, some jet lag involved in there, although they have a nice little break, so I think they'll be okay. But I just don't necessarily think that's a good move in the regular season, and I don't think it's anything that will ever happen on a permanent basis Because a team in Europe just would not be able to travel all the time in the United States into Canada and then go back to England all the time. Like, it would never work. It would just not make sense at all. So, I mean, it's nice every now and then. Maybe you could do it as kind of like how baseball's done it before, where they've had games in Japan and Korea, like a series right in the beginning. Maybe like the first game or two of the season right away, and then all the rest of your games are like a normal season goes. So I could see that maybe working out, but right in the middle of the season, just a one-time thing, I think that kind of just hurts some of these players. The games will be a lot closer as far as timely-wise, so they're going to not necessarily have as much rest later in the season. I don't really think that's a good move. Mexico's a little different. It's a lot closer. Plus, you have teams that were already close to Mexico anyway, but I like the idea, but not in the regular season. It just doesn't really make sense. Anyways, guys, that's going to end our episode for today. Hope you enjoyed. My name is Ben.
And I'm Anthony.
And we are leading you into the weekend. Hope you have a great weekend. A lot of good NFL games on schedule. Well, hopefully they will be good. Last week they were pretty terrible. A lot of lopsided games. Hopefully we won't have that issue this week. I'd like to thank you for listening. Have a good weekend, and we will see you on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.